The basic problem here is that we still, after 150 years, haven't figured out what to do with the freed black slaves. Some of them have done fine, of course. This is a great country, the best in the world, for smart and capable black citizens. And, as Charles Murray reminded us with a fine book recently, we have a white underclass that is increasingly a problem and a burden. Everything comes down to math at last, though. In this case, to the distribution of abilities and behaviours in different populations, to the smart fraction. The white underclass is not so large in relation to the whole white population. It's a burden, probably a permanent one, but we can carry it. The black underclass is much bigger in relation to the whole black population. It's so much bigger, in fact, that welfare usage by blacks and whites is very nearly the same in gross. Blacks get 40% of all welfare payments. Whites get just a tad less, 39%. Yet, there are 5 times as many whites overall as blacks. There's the disproportion. Average per capita, blacks are getting 5 times as much of the welfare dollar as whites. Whites don't want to be around the black underclass. Neither, for that matter, do middle-class blacks. But racial solidarity keeps their preference more repressed. These simple truths have driven great social changes. After the collapse of Reconstruction, the black underclass was mostly a southern problem, kept under control by policies of segregation and intimidation. Then came the great migrations through the middle decades of the 20th century, out of the rural south into the urban north. White southerners weren't sorry to see blacks go. White northerners weren't thrilled, but there were plenty of factory jobs, and then there was a war to win, and then there was a booming post-war economy. In the 1950s, the liberal social conscience came into its own. There was Brown v. Board of Education and federal troops at Little Rock. There was actually busing in Detroit in the early 1960s. Busing wasn't just a 1970s thing. White flight started up, and it was well underway by the time the 1967 Detroit riots happened. A friend who knows Detroit well, with a long family history there, tells me, quote, "The 1967 riot was the nail in the coffin, not the starter's pistol." In 1973, just 40 years ago as I speak, Detroit's population went majority black, and Coleman Young was elected mayor. Detroit became a black city under black control, to much celebration at the time. A 1976 report in the New York Times was headlined, "Blacks see Detroit as their own and hope to rebuild." 40 years later, it's all in ruins. The experience and that underlying math suggest the lesson to be taken. There are enough smart and capable whites that the white population can carry its own dysfunctional underclass. The proportionally much bigger black dysfunctional underclass is too heavy for smart and capable blacks to carry, even if they felt inclined to, which they don't much. They'd rather hang out in the suburbs. So who's going to carry the black underclass? In the end, of course, the whole nation must. Dysfunctional they may be, but they are our fellow citizens, just as much as the white underclass. The lesson from Detroit's bankruptcy is that blacks can't do it. But if blacks running a black city can't work, and whites don't want to move back there to live among them, we end up with what is essentially a reservation. Detroit may be the first, but there'll be plenty of others. Low-class blacks are being cleansed from New York, Washington, Los Angeles, and other big cities. They have to go somewhere. They'll go to reservation cities like Detroit, or to small towns, from which whites and middle-class blacks will promptly flee. So we'll end up with a lot of poor, black, unproductive, dysfunctional communities managed from outside. The custodial state envisaged by Richard Herrnstein 40 years ago. 40 years ago, when Coleman Young took over Detroit. It's been a long 40 years.